Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Pete Canlin. I'm the Executive Director at the American Kratom Association. I'd like to welcome you all to our Kratom Consumer Council update call. I'm joined tonight by Mac Haddo, who is the Senior Fellow on Public Policy at the American Kratom Association. And we're going to hear from Mac a little bit later, and also David Carlucci, former New York State Senator. And we're going to hear from David here in a few minutes. On tonight's agenda, we want to talk a little bit about the Kratom Consumer Council. For those of you who are on the call that are already members of the KCC, thank you for joining. We really appreciate your support. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the Kratom Consumer Council, thank you for joining us tonight. We'll give a little bit more background information on this organization that has already proved to be just a tremendous resource in the fight to protect Kratom. And we at the American Kratom Association see it really has a central role moving forward. And so if you're interested in joining, you're wondering how you can help out in the fight to protect Kratom, I can say that the KCC is that place for you, and we definitely need your help. Let me start the presentation here. What we've learned, and we're going to hear about this from David and Mac a little bit later, Kratom advocates are our most effective resource. I'm not going to hit on this too much because we'll hear again a little bit later, but we see time and time again when Kratom advocates are able to step up and share their powerful Kratom testimony, many times that makes all the difference. It's one thing for a lobbyist, for myself, for other people to go in and talk about the American Kratom Association, talk about Kratom. It's another thing for these folks to hear from their constituents. And in that picture, you can see folks lining up in Ohio when the Ohio Kratom advocates came out in force and really turned the tide on a situation that we thought was going the wrong direction. And so time and time again, folks across the country have stepped up and made all the difference because of their personal Kratom testimony. So the mission of the Kratom Consumer Council is to harness that advocacy energy, to give a platform, an area for you all to share that strong testimony with elected officials. It really does make all the difference, as we'll hear a little bit later. But it's also maintaining that strong line of communication. We've got 50 states that we're working on right now. We've got 50 balls up in the air, and we do our best to address each one of those. But to have members of the Kratom Consumer Council ready to go in each one of those states, keeping an eye on everything that is going on, just helps us out tremendously. It all comes down to, and that's really what we're going to be talking about tonight, is how can you share your personal Kratom story, and what does that actually mean? What impact does that actually have in the fight to protect Kratom? One of the benefits that I have as the executive director at the AKA is my cell phone number is on the website. And so I get people calling me all the time who some have questions, but some just want to talk to somebody and talk about how Kratom has made such a difference in their life, how Kratom has just changed their trajectory, and in many times they believe it's saved their life. But that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have David Carlucci on the phone. David, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
David's a former New York State Senator. And I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his journey to where we are right now. But it's a great story, and it's one that talks about the effectiveness that Kratom advocates can have in working with legislators. So David, I'll turn the time over to you, and you can share your personal Kratom story.
Well, Pete, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I just want to thank everybody that's on the call tonight because your advocacy is key. As a former state senator, and I got introduced to Kratom because back in about 5 years ago, when we started to hear about the FDA and their push to ban Kratom, that all I heard was the negative. At that time, I wasn't talking to anyone that was sharing their story of what Kratom did for them. And so at that time, I put in legislation that would ban Kratom in New York State. I was part of the addiction task force and had been working on many different issues. And so the silver lining is that I put that legislation in and then heard from so many advocates and so many personal stories about what Kratom really did. And I tell that story because I think it's just so essential. Because after hearing those personal stories, I put in legislation to regulate Kratom that we call the Kratom Consumer Protection Act that we're trying to get passed in all 50 states and make sure that Kratom remains safe, accessible, and legal throughout the United States. And I'm absolutely convinced, as someone that has spent 10 years in the New York State Senate, was served on the addiction task force for most of those 10 years, and chaired the mental health committee, that we have to make sure that the politicians in the United States hear our stories, that they understand and put a face to this issue. When you talk to most people today, they have no idea about what Kratom does or what it is and why people consume it. And that leaves a vacuum, so that when they read something on WebMD or they hear just something from the FDA, they will just buy it and not hear anything else. So it's so important that we work together and share your story and make sure that your individual Congress member, senator, assembly member, state rep, that they know who you are. And I'll tell you, as someone that represented over 300,000 people in New York, I still took into consideration one of the most important things was what I was hearing from my residents, from my constituents. And that's why I just want to make sure that I echo that voice to you all to make sure that you know how important your actions are. And I just wanted to drive that home today and look forward to working with all of you to get the Kratom Consumer Protection Act passed throughout the United States and make sure that it is accessible and safe to people throughout the United States. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for sharing your stories.
Absolutely. And David, thank you so much for taking a few moments here to share that with us. I know you've been working hard in several states across the country to help move forward pro-Kratom legislation. So we just want to thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. So how is the Kratom Consumer Council organized? So for those of you who don't know, we've got a state chair in each one of the 50 states. So we're covered across the country, and those state chairs help communicate the information from those individual states to me. And those state chairs help implement the direction that comes from the American Kratom Association. And you're going to start, if you're one of those state chairs, we're going to start having regular calls where we can, where I can provide the latest information to you on what we're doing. As we mentioned before, and Mac's going to be talking about here in just a couple minutes, things are going to be heating up here very quickly. And it's absolutely critical that we have this infrastructure in place, that everyone knows who their state chair is, and that we're able to have open lines of communication. But within each one of those states, we have congressional district captains. And those congressional district captains are really those feet on the ground. They're the ones who are able to provide information to their state chairs on if they hear something, if they an article, if they hear something from their congressional representative. Right now, we have a representative in every single congressional district, but we need more. I want to be able to get to the point that we have 2, 3, sometimes 4 people who we can call a congressional district captain, so we can make sure that we have complete coverage across the country. Now, there are a few examples. There are many examples about the lobbying strength and the grassroots advocacy and how it's worked. Utah, I think there's probably no better example than Utah, where we saw the vendor community, the advocate community, our Mac practically lived out there during this time to make sure that the Kratom Consumer Protection Act was passed in Utah, and ultimately we were able to get that passed. But it was a combination of advocates and lobbying efforts, and I can honestly say, and I think Mac would absolutely agree, it could not have been done with just one of those elements. We needed both of those to get that passed. And Laura Romney there in the picture is just a fantastic advocate, a fantastic representative, community, CMAC, the governor, and then also Senator Bramble, who is another Kratom champion. But this is the best of all worlds coming together and to get pro-Kratom legislation passed in Utah. And so with that, MAC has been the leader on the ground for the last 5 years on protecting Kratom, on not only stopping Kratom bans, and I don't think there has been one Kratom ban, knock on wood, that has been implemented on a state level since MAC took the reins, but he's also helped craft the language behind the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and has been instrumental in introducing it across the country. So without any further delay, I'm going to open up the time to Mac. Mac.
Thanks, Pete, and welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, because we really want to give you some information that I think will arm you to go forward and do some things that we're going to ask you to do in the next month that'll be very significant in our fight. One thing that I wanted to bring everyone up to speed on, we just concluded an emergency summit that we held this past week. And we had the opportunity to hear from the former chief of staff of the Department of Health and Human Services, who gave us the backstory on what happened with the rescission letter that was sent by Dr. Giroir, who was the Assistant Secretary for Health at the time when the review was undertaken about Kratom and whether it should be scheduled. Now, just to give you a quick update, the FDA had submitted its second scheduling request. This was the first that was a full 8-factor analysis that's required under the Controlled Substances Act on October 17th of 2017. Then in the middle of, after receiving that, the acting Assistant Secretary for Health formally notified the Drug Enforcement Administration that they endorsed the recommendation, and it was pending before the Drug Enforcement Administration. So under the Controlled Substances Act, the two steps that were critical to getting it to the DEA had taken place. One is the FDA recommended, and ostensibly with the support of an endorsement made by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. Then the Assistant Secretary for Health, who is tasked under the statute as the delegated official at the Department of Health and Human Services to be the official reviewer of the recommendation by the FDA and NIDA. They are the independent arbiter of whether or not the standards had been met. And so the acting Assistant Secretary of Health, in response to Dr. Gottlieb, then the FDA commissioner, formally transmitted the recommendation. So what we learned was that and this happened back at the end of January, when Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin and a Virginia colleague had released a letter that had been kept in secret for more than 2.5 years. And we all know the HHS letter signed by Dr. Giroir formally rescinded the recommendation. But what we did not know is how dangerously close we were to having Kratom scheduled, because the former chief of staff at HHS who was at the summit with us described the events that took place. He said that as a part of his responsibilities, then as the deputy chief of staff at the time that this occurred, he received a notice of a recommendation for this new regulation, which was the scheduling of Kratom. He said he looked at the piece of paper. It was his responsibility under the Trump administration to review all new regulations to determine whether or not they should be implemented and to identify whether or not there was other regulations that could replace them. Remember, Trump had a 2-for-1 policy that he repealed 2 for every one that was enacted. And so there was a little bit of scrutiny that the department had to undergo in order to determine what 2 would drop out if the 1 was enacted. And so that was the condition that we were operating under. But this individual saw that and said, I don't even know what Kratom is. And he Googled it and saw everything that you and I see when we Google Kratom. He called Dr. Giroir, who was then not the acting, but the officially nominated and confirmed Assistant Secretary for Health. Dr. Giroir said to him, I don't know much about Kratom, but from what I've heard from the FDA, this is probably something that should be scheduled. So this Deputy Chief of Staff then started to do a little more work, received notice that there was an interagency call, which he got on, where they were literally polishing the press release to announce that the scheduling recommendation was going to be issued in the Federal Register by the Drug Enforcement Administration. All of that was taking place in July of 2018. We had no idea that we were that close to getting a scheduling recommendation that would literally have banned Kratom in the United States. What this courageous individual did is he asked Dr. Jawad to collaborate with him to determine whether or not this was justified. And the more they looked at the science, the more they understood how far off the reservation that the FDA was, they started to push back. They started to raise questions. They got into hand-to-hand combat with the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. The DEA was angry because they were ready to move and they had their rollout plan ready. They knew the blowback that they were going to get from the Kratom community, and they were preparing for it. And the only way that the Department of Health and Human Services could stop the inevitable ban that Dr. Gottlieb was pushing internally, both at the Trump White House and at the DEA, was for Dr. Jawad to formally rescind the scheduling recommendation, because under the statute, the DEA can only act if there is an approval by the Department of Health and Human Services. That rescission letter, issued on August the 16th of 2018, was critically important to our community. And all of that behind the scenes, outside of the public eye, without any knowledge on our part, was actually about to happen, but for Dr. Jawad and his colleague, who is who later became the chief of staff at HHS. So that story is alarming at many respects, because they can get away with it in the dark. They can do what they were going to do. And in a podcast, after Dr. Gottlieb complained about the one individual that stopped him from getting Kratom banned, referencing either this deputy chief of staff or Dr. Jawad, or in combination conflating the two, he was complaining about it. And he indicated that even after that decision was made to rescind it, that he, Dr. Gottlieb, was able to convince the White House and the DA that they were going to circumvent the Assistant Secretary for Health. Now, I don't know how they were going to do that, because under the statute, the statutory requirements are clear that it is the Assistant Secretary of Health who is delegated by the Secretary of Health and Human Services to be the official that reviews it. And the only way that they could have, in fact, circumvented that procedure would be for the Secretary of Health to rescind the delegated authority to the Assistant Secretary for Health. And then the HHS Secretary would have to say, I want this scheduled. That would have been an extraordinary action, given the damning assessment that was made by Dr. Jawad when he looked at the evidence that the FDA had provided. And in his letter, in his transmittal letter, he pointed out that the FDA had failed to consider emerging evidence. The FDA had failed to consider that there was legitimate disputes between reputable scientists about the pharmacology of Kratom and whether or not Kratom actually had caused those deaths that the FDA claimed that they had done, or was it because the FDA was trumping up these charges in order to make some case that didn't exist from a scientific perspective. And Dr. Jawad outlined all of the scientific requirements that would have been necessary in order to justify any scheduling. And then he made the most compelling point, because in the end, there is a tremendous amount of discretion that is allowed for the FDA and the Drug Enforcement Administration and HHS to schedule things. There are many things that could be scheduled, but Dr. Jawad made the point that millions of Americans would be put at risk if Kratom were banned, who today are successfully using Kratom to either wean off of dangerously addictive and potentially deadly opioids, and force them back to opioids, or into a very dangerous adulterated black market place for adulterated Kratom products. It is stunning to see how far or how close they came in order to get what was done. And then you have Dr. Gottlieb complaining about being able to circumvent the law in order to get what he wants, which is his own personal agenda. It is beyond imagination that we got that close to that kind of a situation. So here we are today. We know that this stealth scheduling maneuver that was used by the FDA is an omnipresent threat to us even today. because with the new administration, there is a brand new Assistant Secretary for Health. We don't have any idea where the Biden administration actually sits on this issue. We don't know where the Assistant Secretary for Health sits on the issue. We don't know what influence that Dr. Gottlieb is having on the Biden White House or on the new Secretary of Health. Congressman Pocan, in a hearing a week ago, asked the Secretary of Health for his position about Kratom. And the Assistant Secretary of Health said two things. The first was scary. He said, we are going to defer to the FDA on science. We trust Dr. Woodcock. And so we're going to defer to them. Now, that ignores his statutory authority or responsibility to be an independent reviewer. If he's going to defer to the FDA, then he's not necessary, and he's abdicating his statutory duty under the law. But the second thing he said, which was a little bit of a salvation, was that in the context of the opioid pandemic and epidemic that's going on of overdoses, that we needed to do everything possible in order to allow people to have some sort of life-saving therapy. And that, of course, at least leaves the door open a crack for us to be able to make the case to Secretary Becerra about what Kratom is and what it is not. And so all of that leads us to what our current strategy is as we go forward. First off, you all will remember, and it was promised over and over again, that in 2016, the FDA promised that if the DEA did not schedule Kratom, if that original Federal Register notice were not effective, that there would be tens of thousands of Americans who would be dying in the street because of Kratom overdoses. And of course, they had 33 deaths at that point. When they refiled their October 17th, 2017 scheduling recommendation, they had boosted that number up to 33 deaths, and ultimately it got to 44. That, in terms of the context of claiming that we were going to have tens of thousands of deaths, none of that happened, proving the case that the FDA was wrong on the science when it came to their description, their characterization, and their unfair bias against Kratom that they continue to prosecute to this day. We see now that the FDA has adopted a new strategy, and it's evidenced in the FDA civil confiscation procedure on the Florida company that they took a month and a half ago. The most startling thing about the complaint that was filed, that the FDA's position now is that Kratom is defined as a dietary ingredient that is not currently approved as a new dietary, doesn't have the benefit of a registration of a new dietary ingredient notification. The FDA has not allowed an NDIN to proceed to market and to be fully registered. And because of that fact, it is therefore adulterated and all Kratom raw materials per se. That has not been their position up to this point. And we know that the construct of the law was designed to say that a substance becomes defined by its intended use. And so if an importer brings in a Kratom raw material to the United States and is not involved in the manufacturing, there is no authority that the FDA has to impose that import alert. They've abused their discretion in doing what they've done to this date. It is absolutely clear in the statute that intended use is the standard. And so when a vendor markets a Kratom product and claims that it has therapeutic benefits that are by law impermissible health claims, then the FDA has every right, and by the way, we at the AK support them in taking those products off of the marketplace. The key here is to demonstrate to policymakers that we as the Kratom community cannot and will not be defined by the actions of these rogue vendors who are making impermissible health claims, but that's what the FDA is doing. They say it clearly in their import alert that deals with an unapproved drug. They are claiming that first, Kratom is a drug. They can't claim that on the raw material itself, but they're per se saying it. They shouldn't be able to get away with that. And they're saying that because Kratom is being marketed by most vendors as having a therapeutic benefit, therefore Kratom is an unapproved drug. So on that battlefield, we clearly have to eliminate those vendors who are making those impermissible therapeutic claims. We at AKA have been fighting hard on this issue. We have referred over 30 vendors to the FDA and demanded that they take action. Over the last year and a half, when we started this program, not a single warning letter that were a result of our submissions. That's a two-edged sword. First off, it shows you that the FDA is really not interested. And secondly, it shows public policymakers down on Capitol Hill that the FDA has their own agenda and they want to make it a circular reasoning. They say that FDA vendors are selling Kratom products as unapproved drugs, but they don't want to eliminate those vendors from the marketplace because then they eliminates their argument. And so we're going to work hard, and we have had a breakthrough where our complaints to the FDA ostensibly have been heard, and we're told that we can expect some enforcement actions on those reports that we provided. And we hope that they act swiftly so that we can show that by eliminating those vendors on the marketplace, that most vendors are marketing their products for the right intended use, which do not involve therapeutic claims. The second issue is whether the products are being marketed as dietary supplements. This is a more nuanced argument because in the past, you've been able to market your product as a herbal or dietary supplement as long as you did not make a structure function claim. You feel better, you have more energy, that kind of thing. As long as you didn't make that claim, then you were not technically a dietary supplement. The FDA has now taken a new position, a new administrative position that says everything that is made by manufacturing the Kratom product is by definition a dietary supplement if it's not an unapproved drug. So they try to win the battle by redefining under the statute what Kratom actually is. And so our argument has been, and we continue to encourage Kratom vendors to sell their products as foods because there is no pre-market approval that the statutory authority for pre-market approval that the FDA has over foods. They can still go after a food for being unsafe, and we think we can win in that battleground because of the way that the law is written and the overregulation posture of the FDA. So we stand here today uncertain about the Biden and what the Biden administration is going to do. We don't yet know who the Biden's FDA commissioner nominee will be. It could very well be Janet Woodcock, who the Secretary of Health and Human Services says that he will defer to on all scientific issues. And we see them with their more aggressive civil confiscation procedures on Kratom products. They are trying to create a de facto ban on Kratom while they continue to work to convince the DEA to schedule Kratom. So what we want to do is to develop a more effective Kratom consumer structure for protecting consumers and how we can advocate for them. So what we are asking tonight is for the KCC to do a couple of important things. I have surveyed about almost 3 dozen staffers that have worked on these issues and members of state legislators. And you heard Senator Carlucci say it himself. When he was referring to his conversion from being that senator that wanted to ban Kratom to the one who wanted to advocate for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, I listened closely. He didn't describe, well, I was impressed with the statutory construct of the law. I was impressed with the scientific argument where now Dr. McCurdy is showing that lyophilized Kratom tea is actually going to be effective in people that are trying to attenuate pain and to wean off of opioids. He didn't talk about the Johns Hopkins study that showed that 87% of people that are using Kratom for the purpose of weaning off of opioids are seeing significant relief from withdrawal symptoms, and the 35% were opioid free. He didn't talk about the scientific data that Dr. Henningfield has provided that shows that Kratom's safety profile is dramatically more safe than opioids. What you heard him say was that constituents told their Kratom stories about how it saved their lives or improved the quality of their lives. So we have reconfigured our approach on lobbying in terms of how the KCC can interact with their senators and House members in the US Congress, and in some respects with their state legislators. So here's the deal. Beginning on July 19th, proceeding to the end of the month while the Congress is in session, we're going to ask KCC members to place a call to their senators. We're going to focus on senators, and I'll describe that in a second here as to why. We want you to call and ask for a meeting, either by phone or with a Zoom link, to talk to the health legislative assistant. And when you get that person on the phone, there are 2 messages that you want to deliver. One is you want to tell your personal Kratom story and the stories of people that you as a KCC member represent. Tell them about how Kratom has saved their lives. Tell them about how Kratom has improved the quality of their lives. That's the message that resonates, and it opens the door for the next discussion, which will be something that I'll do and other lobbyists on the AK team to discuss all of those issues. But we need them to hear the honest and compelling story that you can provide about how important this miracle plant is. The second thing is that you ask for a meeting that the legislative assistant will take with the AK lobbying team. And then you simply record the name and the contact information for that legislator, and you submit it to the AKA, and we will follow up. Now, we will also give you a packet of information about the general nature, so it won't overwhelm them, that you can send as a follow-up to that particular individual that you're speaking with in your Senate offices. We will do the same thing for the House offices starting in September. But we want to hit the Senate offices right now because we need to have some Senate advocates that will help us with some appropriations report language that's already in the House bill. And that'll be part of the pitch that the lobbying team will make to those members to support that report language, which will put the throttle on the FDA. And then we will also pitch the passage of, and the co-sponsorship, and then the passage of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So your story and those that you represent, the information packet that we'll provide to you that you can forward to that staffer, and a request for and securing a commitment for that staffer to have a conversation with the AK lobbying team. That's what we're asking for. And you'll get some information between now and the 19th, but you want to start thinking about, and this is a simple process. You pick up the phone and you call the local office and say, you want to be connected to the correct staff member in the Senate office of the two senators that you have. And when you make that call to the local office, they will connect you, and that will give you, by the way, you become a constituent issue to them. They will set up that meeting. Just be persistent, be polite, and tell them that you want to have that conversation, and then schedule it and go through with and we'll send you these, not only the documents, but sort of an outline of the issues you should cover. It is a simple request because you're only going to talk about how Kratom has meant a lot to you and how they need to talk to the AK lobbying team because the FDA has been so unfair in its regulatory posture towards Kratom. That will make an enormous difference. Let me just close, and then we can open up for questions. And let me close with a sort of an assessment of where we are at the state level. This year, we had two states that have enacted the Kratom Consumer Protection Act: Oklahoma, signed by the governor, and Oregon, which is on the governor's desk and will be signed within the next 30 days. Those are magnificent victories for us. It will bring the number of states where the KCPA has been passed to 6. We are continuing to be active in Wisconsin, which is currently a banned state. We're active in Rhode Island, a banned state. We're active in Vermont, a banned state. Vermont is a biennial legislature. Some legislatures do that where you file a bill and they're 2 years go to pass it. So some of these states are just like that as a biennial legislation. But we've got 3 of these states where we have active legislation. I think we're going to do well in Indiana next year. And I think we're also going to do well in Arkansas, even though the legislature will not be in session next year, because Arkansas is one of those states where they meet every 2 years. But I had the opportunity with Dr. Henningfield to meet with the new Secretary of Health in Arkansas about 3 weeks ago, and they are formally reviewing the basis for the original scheduling decision made by the Arkansas Public Health Department. And I think that we'll get a fair hearing there and set the stage for Arkansas to be removed as well. So we're working hard on those states. We are still alive also in Ohio. The Ohio legislature will take their break now for the couple of months for the summer, and then they'll come back in the fall. And I think we're going to do well in Ohio too with our legislation. And there's a couple other states that we're still moving on. And we hope to get filed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey to start that process. And I'm optimistic that we'll get that done this year. The one thing at the state level that were huge disappointments to us were the state of Idaho, where we could not get a hearing because of one chairman of the Agricultural Committee who simply didn't see the need to have any regulations given that Kratom was legal in the state. And he didn't buy into the adulteration argument. We're going to continue working there. In Colorado, the state senator who had committed to file the bill simply didn't do it. We believe because she was influenced by the FDA and what's called the Tri-County Health Department in Colorado. The Senate president has made a commitment to me personally that he's going to work hard to get this done. We were not successful in Missouri, even though we passed the Missouri House unanimously, and we got a unanimous do pass recommendation out of the General Laws Committee and it was put on the calendar for Senate action. And it was only because of a fight about Medicaid coverage where the Senate adjourned without taking us up. We will win in Missouri next year. It was passed except for this alternative fight. Same thing happened in Texas. We had a 113 to 9 or 8 vote in the House. It went to the Senate Health Committee, got a unanimous do pass recommendation, was put on the consent calendar, and then a fight between the Speaker, the House and the Senate President, Lieutenant Governor, actually. They adjourned, signed, and die, and they left over 120 bills that were on the consent calendar hanging. So we lost those 2 states, not because of Kratom, but because of other kinds of issues. We lost in Florida. No excuse for that. A couple of our friends who are libertarians believe that since there was not a threat of a ban that had been perennially filed by Representative Jacobs, who sadly passed away, they just felt like we don't have to do anything. And they do. They have to protect Kratom. So we're going to be back at work in Florida. And we continue in West Virginia, in Virginia. We've got a number of states where we're going to be active in the coming year. So I'm optimistic that we're going to do well in the states and continue our fight to get the state Kratom Consumer Protection Acts passed there. So everyone should be encouraged about where we are and how we've done and how we're moving forward. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions anyone has, and glad to answer anything that you think is important for the group to have an answer to.
Mac, thank you very much for that update. One question, and I know this continues to be a question that people talk back and forth about. You mentioned our truth in labeling program, where we're holding vendors responsible for what they say. They can't make any impermissible claims. But what about Kratom advocates? Can Kratom advocates talk about how Kratom helps them with their pain, helps them with those claims that maybe a vendor can't make, but an advocate can? So you can talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, if you are a vendor, you cannot utter the words that associate Kratom with a therapeutic benefit, even though it may be true for you personally. You just can't do it. So if you are not a vendor, you hold the constitutional First Amendment right to express any view that you have about the benefits that any substance provides to you. So you as a Kratom advocate, and as long as you're not a vendor, can say anything that you personally have experienced or you believe about the therapeutic benefits of Kratom for whatever purpose.
Absolutely. And if you have a question, just hit the Q&A button at the bottom, put in your question, and we'll make sure that we get to it. I did have somebody text me and ask, they were worried that they wouldn't know what to say when they reach out to their senator's office. Don't worry, as Mac talked about it, we're going to give you a full package of information and a step-by-step process on exactly what to say. And so don't worry about that at all. We'll make sure that we provide that information. Mac, can you talk a little bit about what the KCPA is? I know we didn't really set the table on what it was. We might have some new folks here on the call that might not exactly know what the state level KCCPA is and what the federal one would look to do.
So the state KCPA essentially puts into state law what the federal government should be doing and has the authority currently to do, but the FDA refuses to do it. That is that it requires all Kratom products introduced for sale into the state where the state KCPA is introduced and hopefully passed need to be manufactured using good manufacturing processes. It requires that there is no synthesizing of the alkaloids and that the alkaloids cannot be altered even naturally beyond the levels at which those alkaloids appear. And we specifically recommend that 7-hydroxymetrogenine can never be higher than 2% as a fraction of the overall alkaloid content. It requires that all products be labeled with the identification of the manufacturer so that there is an issue that they will have to, they'll be able to track back where it came from. And it requires that the vendors have an independent certificate of analysis showing compliance with the product that's introduced for sale. and then the age limitation. So that's it. It's a fairly straightforward proposal. It's all about consumer protection. It does not put a huge financial burden on the taxpayers in the state. And there are there are occasions where in the state of Oregon, as an example, the state agriculture department wanted to, as a backstop, be able to hire 4 people to administer this program. It was completely unnecessary. It cost the Oregon taxpayers $1.9 million a year. I thought that was going to kill the bill. It did not. They were willing to, the legislators there were willing to accept it. They put an enactment date that's a year out so that they could assess whether there really is a need for that level of enforcement. But I think that that's the outlier. But we got it passed even with that high fiscal note, they call it. This should not be a burden on any state in proceeding ahead. Now, the current model that I've just described to you is different than what we passed in Utah, because our original concept was that we would have more aggressive enforcement, but it clearly became evident that some of these state agencies became almost predatory in wanting to have more money in order to expand their fiefdoms. And so we've scaled that back, and we think we have an excellent format now for the KCPA. At the federal level, much different situation. It will suspend the FDA's authority to regulate kratom as a dietary supplement until and if the NIDA research comes in that demonstrates that it's not eligible for an NDIN. So the NDIN is the new dietary ingredient notification, which was required by the DSHEA Act, which says that a product, before it can be marketed, has to demonstrate a safety profile, that the FDA has broad discretion, and they blocked all kratom NDINs. But the DSHEA Act did say that the substances that were in commerce in the United States prior to October 15th of 1994 are grandfathered in. And the FDA has refused to accept any evidence of kratom commerce prior to 1994, even though we know it existed back in the 70s, and that there are affidavits, but the requirement that the FDA has set to prove that is an impossible one. It requires that there be a certified software validated receipt for software programs that only existed for the big chain stores in 1994. So they know we can't meet that standard. And then they say that there has to be some sort of a catalog showing an advertisement for kratom. We know that kratom was in fact a substance that was popular among ethnic communities, and ethnic delis sold it, or it was imported for personal use from Southeast Asia by individual consumers. There's not going to be that kind of documentation, but the FDA is very crafty in the way that they've done that. So the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act will restrict that. It will restrict any scheduling of kratom until and if the science from the NIDA studies that are ongoing demonstrate that there is a high addiction liability, which is one of the main criteria of the Controlled Substances Act. We know that they can't meet that burden. The science is getting better and better. From the 2018 letter that cited emerging science that Dr. Jawad cited, we've had 20 new studies that are very positive for kratom to add to the very positive kind of experience as we go forward. So I think that that's great. And it also will limit the FDA's ability to impose an import alert. All import alerts will be lifted until and only if the FDA, who will have the burden of proof, can show that an individual vendor is importing a product that's violative of the food safety standards for Salmonella, E. coli, and heavy metals. So we're going to eliminate this abusive process that the FDA has imposed with the current import alert authority that they have seized. So that's essentially the thrust of the federal KCPA. It will be an essential piece of legislation to constrain the FDA going forward.
Very good, thank you. And I'm getting a few questions here, but so just to underscore with folks, as you can see here, if you'd like to become a member of the Kratom Consumer Council, you can always email me at pete.canlin@americankratom.org. My email address is in the email that you received about the webinar tonight, or you can go to this link. Go to americankratom.org, advocacy, KCC, and you can sign up to become a member of the KCC, and you can also share your testimony so we can have it. As Mac talked about, also starting on July 19th, reach out to the U.S. Senator's office, share your testimony, create a meeting. If you're able to create that meeting, let us know and we'll help you out. We'll be sending out information before then with a complete document with an FAQ, step-by-step process on what you need to do. And then also this last part is to please share this information with other folks that you know who you think would be interested in helping to protect Kratom. We need to continue to grow the Kratom army, those Kratom warriors. This fight is only going to get more difficult from here. It's going to become more complicated. We need as many people on our side as possible. Right now, we have over 400 members of the KCC. It would be fantastic if within the next week we were able to add another 100 members, which we can do. We absolutely can do. We've got 73 active members who've reached out to me from the KCC just in the last couple of weeks, wanting to know how they can get involved. If each one of those people reached out to a friend or to 2 friends, we'd be able to double, triple the size of our current KCC membership. So please reach out to folks. If you know folks on Facebook, share the link with them and they can join. Mac, we have a question about
let me clarify. Let me clarify
please.
something that you just said. When you make the call on the 19th to your Senate office, 2 senators in your state, you need to be solo on those. And the only message that you need to convey is your story, how it helped you with pain, fatigue, with arthritis, with, as long as you're not a vendor, anything that your story, it helped you get off of opioids, it helped you get off of alcoholism. Whatever your story is, you tell that story. You tell it as plainly and as persuasively as you can. And all you're asking that staffer to do is to please accept a phone call from the AK lobbying team that will give them the information that they need about the legislation and about the scientific basis for it. That's it. This is not a heavy lift. I found that when we have the calls with the advocates and then I'm on the call with them, the focus is not on that advocate story. It needs to be. This is like screening a sales contact. We want you to tell your story, to actually solicit that staffer to understand what your personal testimony is, and then you'll have a form to report. And we want to hear the failures and the successes. We want to know who didn't listen. So you'll have a report. There'll be a database you go on to and report who you called, what their name is, what their contact information, what their position is. And then we will follow up with those. But you will also have a packet, and it's not going to be a lot of information. It's going to be supplemental to what you said that we'll send to them as a preliminary briefing document for that staffer to look at before we contact them from the lobbying team.
Very good. Absolutely. So each senator's office should receive several calls, hopefully, with folks in each state, correct?
As many as are able to generate, but we want the KCC members to make the calls to the 2 senators. There are 2 senators from every state, Absolutely. And we want each senator to receive at least 1 call and ask for the staffer to accept a call from our lobbying team.
Very good. Marlena asks, what's going on in Kentucky? She lives there. She wants to know. She didn't hear you mention it. What's going on in Kentucky right now?
So we got in late in Kentucky, and there's some procedural issues both in Kentucky and Tennessee that we have to overcome. Where there's in one case in Kentucky, the health committee Senate chair is a medical doctor. I've spoken with him. He's not a fan of Kratom. We're going to have a heavy lift to get by him. But part of our strategy will be to not have it in his committee. So we've got to do some work there. But right now, both Kentucky and Tennessee are big hurdles for us, but we're going to continue to work it. We've got lobbyists there. We're working hard on it, but it's not a great news story yet, but we're still cultivating it.
Okay, excellent. Somebody asked, how do we find out who our state level KCC leader is? I'll be sending out information to each state to let you know, give you contact information on who to reach out to for your KCC chair. Going through the questions here. Can you be anonymous when you call, or do you need to leave your name, especially if you're in a banned state? And can you talk a little bit about that on should people be worried calling into elected officials if they are in a banned state?
The answer to that is no, you should not be worried about that. There's not going to be any report made about you about being a Kratom consumer. And we in Wisconsin, they packed the hearing room in a banned state. Same was true in Rhode Island. I mean, there's just no interest by a legislator to report any individual that's using Kratom. And you know, I wouldn't confess to any other crime that you may think that you're guilty of. This is a discussion about Kratom. And so you don't have to worry about that. It is unlikely that you will get any kind of response by being anonymous. You are calling as a member of the KCC. Now, if you decide that you don't want to acknowledge that you personally use Kratom because you live in a banned state, that's fine. You can still ask and be an advocate for changing the law. And in this case, there's no federal law against Kratom, none. And so there's no interest that a federal staffer would have to report you to anyone. So understand that it's from a federal level, it's completely legal for use.
If somebody asks if there's a vendor that they believe is not doing something appropriate, how do they reach out to us? There is a truth in labeling section on our website where you can actually submit a concern that you have about a vendor. It goes to me, so send me a link. And we'll be able to follow up. As Mac talked about, we've already sent the FDA over 30 referrals of vendors who we believe are making impermissible claims. So if you know of a vendor, you can either email me at pete.canlin@americankratom.org, or you can go on our website under Truth in Labeling and fill out the form there. That looks like all we have as far as questions go.
So I see one here, Pete, that maybe
Yes.
you didn't see.
Okay.
Question is, how can the KCPA embrace and endorse the use of extract products if we don't allow for synthetic tinkering of the alkaloids? The extraction methods that are approved by the FDA for these kinds of products, as long as you use the right extraction material, they are not considered to be dangerous, nor are you tinkering with it. And you should understand that we, from the very start, recognize that there are product forms of Kratom that people use, some of which can be beneficial. For example, with extracts, it is a very standardized form that you know exactly what you're getting. And by the way, the labeling requirements requires them to put the amounts of metrogeny and 7-hydroxymetrogeny that are in the substance. In extracts, 7-hydroxymetrogeny doesn't really exist much at all, nor, and this is important, do contaminants. They clean all of that out in the extraction process. And so extracts technically are a far more purified form and standard form of Kratom and would be considered by any regulator to be safer than the plant itself, where the raw plant material that's reformulated into a capsule pill or a tincture may in fact contain some level of contaminant that would be permissible under the food laws, but still there. Extracts, they don't exist. So there is no inconsistency in our position with respect to extracts, and it's a mischaracterization to suggest that an extract is anything but a standardized form of the plant alkaloids. Now, it is if they've synthesized the alkaloids to elevate 7-hydroxymetrogenine above the 2% that occurs in a natural plant, absolutely, that's a dangerous product. If they use an extraction chemical that is not approved by the FDA, that becomes a dangerous product. That's what the KCPA will prevent, and so we're fully cognizant of that. Question was asked about California. There are a couple of small communities that have banned Kratom, but San Diego City has also done it. We're working hard in San Diego City to get them to reverse that ban because it happened in 2015 in the middle of the spice and synthetic drug thing, and that's where Kratom got swept up. But for COVID, I think we would already have that ban lifted. We're working hard with them and having discussions, and we're going to continue to fight. In San Diego County, there was a similar ban proposed, and we won that battle. And Pete referenced earlier that there hasn't been a ban in any state since 2016. Well, actually, Rhode Island did in 17, but that was already started in 16. But we haven't lost any of these battles at the state level. We have lost some of the local battles because we didn't know about them in time. So we continue to have signaling systems people reporting them to us. I'm going out to a small community in Mississippi on the Monday night for a Tuesday meeting. And it's a very small town in Mississippi, but Mississippi is a big fight for us because you've got a group out there that calls themselves an anti-drug group that is nothing more than an FDA propaganda machine. And we're going to have to stop them with information at the local level. So we're going to fight those battles where it's appropriate. We'll fight the battle in San Diego City and in Oceanside and any other place that we can appropriately address this issue where it's previously been banned. But we're working hard on that, and it's not perfect. In order to let this escalate to the state level, California is enormously expensive to hire lobbyists. I mean, it is off the charts expensive. So we're going to try to do it through an organic way, working with some of these local cities and counties, and hopefully percolate it up through the representatives. And it's going to be probably a couple-year fight there.
Very good. And Mac, we want to thank you for all that you do. And for those folks who are watching, Mac is always traveling. He's always on a call. Just in the last several weeks, he's been to several states. He is a tireless advocate for Kratom, for the folks that depend on Kratom. And we are very lucky to have Mac joining with us in this fight. So Mac, thank you very much for all that you do. And take care of yourself, Mac. We don't want to lose you anytime soon. So don't work yourself too hard. I just wanted to say, yes, we will be sending out packets of information to folks, and so you don't feel alone in this task that we're asking you to do. So with that, everyone, I want to thank you so much for being on the call tonight. We have recorded this. We'll be sending out a recording tomorrow, so you can watch it again or you can forward it to somebody else. Thank you so much for volunteering, for stepping up and helping in the fight to protect Kratom. Mac, any last thoughts before we end the call?
Well, just this is important. We live in a community, the Kratom community, which has a lot of diverse voices, and some people, excuse me, some of us are wrong and some of us are right. I'm not perfect. I'm wrong sometimes. All of us are, and we have to be as respectful as we can be. Sometimes it's hard to respect someone who has obviously got an agenda that has nothing to do with the good of the community. And I've been pretty strident in criticizing some that I think are trying to undermine what we're doing in the community. And I know that there are alliances and friendships that have formed over the years, and I may have stepped on some of those. But I can tell you that the bottom line for me, and it always has been, is that we need to do every single thing that we can do in order to keep this plant accessible to consumers and legal. And if we can accomplish that, then some of these harsh words and maybe some of the misunderstandings can heal. But nothing's going to heal if we allow the the FDA to have their way. They are propagandists. They're out to do an expansion of their regulatory authority. It has nothing to do with the safety of this plant. They have a bias against natural substances and dietary supplements that has existed since day one, and they're going to continue to prosecute that, including against Kratom. So we need to fight back. There will be times when we have to call out each other, and that's fine. And when we do that, understand that there's a healing process at the end, and we're all going to work together, because I think we all, even those that disagree, share a common goal. How to get there is obviously an art form. It doesn't mean that we'll always do it right, but we're going to do it with a passion, and we're going to do it in a way that is as organized and as strategically on point as we can make it. So I hope people just will rally towards that goal, understanding sometimes we don't get everything that we want along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mac. I think that's a very appropriate way to end the call tonight. I want to thank everyone again. I hope you have a great evening. Hope you have a wonderful 4th of July. Have a safe time with your friends and family. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care.